on? Yeah. We're starting with systemic change pathways. We've got Jani Swart-Van Biljon starting. Then we're going on to Vincent and Kuda online. I think without further ado, let's move along.
Thank you. All right, so I will be talking about waste management, or more specifically, waste prevention. So sorry if it is a bit of a read. I don't have a presentation today. So with unprecedented volumes of garbage pollution in oceans and other natural environments, we see civil society, governments, organizations, and producers now waking up to the threat it holds for healthy communities, ecosystems, and the Earth's regenerative capacity. So though we tend to think that waste is usually just post-consumer waste that might end up on beaches or landfills, waste is actually a negative externality of modern society all along the value chain. Not only is waste produced during extraction from the earth or the natural environment, manufacturing, transporting, and consumption all produce waste. And the more processes, the more resources, and the more energy is being used. When waste eventually ends up in a landfill, it not only produces methane, which, like CO2, contributes to the greenhouse effect, but also pollutes the groundwater it sifts into. The latter is especially true when organic waste, like kitchen scraps, is mixed with inorganic synthetic materials on a hot garbage dump. Irresponsible waste management systems also pose serious health, well-being, and eventually livelihood threats to surrounding communities, where there is sewage that pollutes drinking water, dirty and broken solid waste that is a danger to children playing outside, air pollution like in Mpumalanga that increases the risk of lung cancer, or the recent mine tailings dam disaster in Jagersfontein in the Free State. So it's clear that our society create waste products in various forms, and in turn they have an impact on our economic, social, and natural environment. So if we want to work towards a just future, socially and environmentally, we also have to address the challenge of how waste is managed or prevented. So while the pollution is getting more media attention, we've also seen informal waste pickers and their organizations getting more media attention. Waste recyclers, reclaimers, waste pickers, or the bagarezi, like they're commonly known, collect recyclable and reusable items from garbage bins and landfills to sell either at buyback center or they insert it into the informal economy. So when researchers and municipalities started quantifying and monetizing this subaltern group's contribution, they actually found that a country like South Africa's recycling rate compares to or even exceeds some other countries who have dedicated recycling systems. It's found that the informal waste pickers in South Africa collect about 90% of recycled materials. They also found that municipalities benefit financially in saving refuse transport expenses and landfill lifespans, almost to about 750 million rand. Moreover, the informal economy also benefits from second-hand goods, and of course, the far more than 100,000 households in South Africa that can now put food on the table. We also see that this unpaid and largely unconscious role that waste pickers play in giving the earth a little bit more breathing space is remarkable. They increase recycling rates so that the future products can be made from recycled materials instead of virgin materials. And they also reduce the litter pollution in rivers that would otherwise pose a risk to clean water and healthy ecosystems. We also actually see that they, and maybe you are all also witness to this, pushing their trolleys in more affluent neighborhoods actually also raise awareness about their work, and in that way influence consumers to buy products that are supposedly more eco-friendly or at least recyclable. They also motivate the separation of consumers' waste at source, meaning that they're separated at home. And a lot of consumers actually are motivated to do that for the sake of the waste reclaimer, never mind the impact for or the benefit for the environment. So they really sacrifice a lot, and they are actually not compensated yet by municipalities. In recent years, with the support from academics and organizations, they have been able to mobilize and advocate for recognition. And in 2020, a national guideline for waste picker integration was actually published. And the National Waste Management Act also now recognizes their contribution. At the same time, we also see that industries, specifically through extended producer responsibility, which ask producers and distributors that they also sort of clean up their act and do their part to make sure that the waste that they actually manufactured in the first place, that is taken out of the environment. They also now increasingly work with waste pickers on projects to see if they can increase their volumes and also be compensated fairly. So when we look at this problem of waste and the stakeholders involved, we usually hear the term the circular economy. And this is specifically from government side, but also even more from producers and the industry. However, when we speak with waste pickers organizations or with the people that work with them, we actually hear more often of zero waste. When considering the literature, circular economy and zero waste do seem near identical. And in fact, a lot of people do use it interchangeably. Both want to reduce useless waste that end up in landfills. Both call for a reform, not just in how waste is managed, for example, through recycling, but also for a change in how products are designed. The difference, though, is that typically producers or businesses support the idea of the circular economy because it doesn't inherently challenge the capitalist growth principle of how our economy works. The circular economy will allow them to still produce, sell, and make profit. They just have to redesign the inputs and optimize waste management. With zero waste, there seems to be more emphasis on the fact that all practices along the value chain should aim to prevent waste in a responsible manner and without threat to the environment or human health. That means waste can also not be incinerated, for example. Essentially, it calls for a reform of life as we know it, because it also asks of us as consumers to change our lifestyles and practices to emulate sustainable natural cycles. Or in the words of the climate justice charter movement, systemic alternatives, simple living, a life freed from compulsive consumption that is so resource intensive and wasteful. So against this background, I'm asking, what can we learn from waste stakeholders, waste management approaches and priorities? And what alternative principles to achieve a climate just future does the informal waste sector offer? So to do this, my qualitative research is conducted in two stages. First, thematic analysis, and secondly, case studies, both against the theoretical framework of eco-socialism, which is a framework that considers the power relations between the economy, people, and the natural environment. With the thematic analysis, I sought to sort of map out the underlying ideologies and basis for the relevant stakeholder support of either the circular economy or zero waste. And to do this, I looked at what they say or advocate for in terms of profit, planet, and people. And these three themes agree both with the three aspects of sustainability, as well as with eco-socialism. So I looked at public documents, stakeholders' websites, press releases, and a few interviews. So as I mentioned, I through this research want to explore what the Subaltern, in this case, the informal waste picker, and those that work with them, what they have in mind for an alternative, a zero waste system. A system that is less concerned with making a profit and more concerned with the well-being of the environment and local communities. So the second part of my research then looks at two case studies that claim to support a zero waste to landfill approach to prevent waste. The one case is an initiative by various stakeholders to divert all organic waste from an informal fresh produce market in the inner city of Durban They managed to work with the municipality to collect some of the 7 tons of organic waste and per week and compost it at the botanical gardens. And the idea is that once it's become compost, that the municipality can use it in green spaces in the city. And in that way, you really diverted a lot of waste from landfill. The second case is that of Bredasdorp in the Western Cape. Here, this zero waste to landfill project was initiated by the local municipality and the Zero Waste Association of South Africa. And they aim to work with residents to separate their waste at source. So keeping all dry goods and all organic waste separate to enable better recycling rates as materials will remain clean, and then actually compost all of the organic waste. In addition, they also invest in a material recovery facility as opposed to a landfill, which will not only support the work of their local waste pickers, but actually integrate them into the new system. So findings from the first part of my research suggest that while many hail the idea of the circular economy as the solution to managing waste, its ideological underpinning seems to weigh heavily in favor of a capitalist productivist orientation, which does not necessarily empower the consumer or civil society. And when doing something environmentally friendly, it is under the guise of ensuring natural resources will be available in the future, or to retain its client base, as many consumers want to make more sustainable choices. When consumers are constantly bombarded with confusing labels that claim eco-friendly or naturally sourced or biocompostable, these are all packaged in a brown cardboard box. They are in many cases greenwashed, thinking they are making the better choice, but in fact they are still persuaded into buying more and more stuff. So on the other hand, zero waste offers an approach that not only challenges social economic boundaries and consumerism for the sake of a cleaner environment, but also involves the consumer in a way that may increase their well-being in the form of simple living. In this sense, we see a message that calls for reducing or reusing goods, repairing those things that are broken, or repurposing them. An honest message and paradigm shift like this can free people from the pressure to have a certain image and, of course, save their money. There are also grounds for critique. A good example of zero waste for consumers, maybe some of you've also seen it here in Joburg, is the more and more shops that offer bring your own containers that you can fill your grains and cleaning supplies. And this prevents post-consumer waste instead of recycling that just tries to manage it. So in terms of principles, waste pickers value, we again see overlaps with principles from the climate justice charter movement. For instance, the way they think about governance, democracy, and ownership within the organization, their sense of international solidarity and how South Africans and migrants work together, even to the extent that they will decline a municipal contract if everyone is not recognized or paid. They also see, we also see how they value and contribute to knowledge sharing through community engagements and talks at schools or with municipalities. So when I looked at the 2 case studies, we can see that they strive for something that is local, low cost, low tech, and replicable. And in addition, they both strive to dignify the spaces and jobs of those in the informal local economy. We also see that because they bring the waste, let's say the organic waste through composting back into public spaces, it also sort of addresses that alienation we previously had with waste, where we as consumers are unaware of the consequences of our lifestyles. In both cases, the local municipalities have also bought into the cause. And this is important because as municipalities or government, at least they're primarily responsible for waste management and safe living spaces. And so they can influence residents and industries in how they should conduct their affairs. Neither of them profit from the initiatives, but instead try to establish a cost-saving model and are confident that their interventions will create more jobs. Okay, let me skip a bit here. So what I found is, what can the future of waste management or waste management prevention look like? So based on this, it would be on the principles of zero waste and solidarity, where you put more emphasis and investment into preventing waste, where we place the well-being of local communities and the environment above profit, where we save people and municipalities money and create more jobs, and where solutions and technologies are not just owned by or dependent on one stakeholder, but instead collaborated on by all stakeholders. Okay, let me stop there.
We've now got Vincent Siwawa working a bottom-up smart city approach to solid waste management, the case for ICT-enabled waste reclaimers system in two South African cities.
Quality. So in a bottom-up smart city, citizens are not seen as passive technology. It is imposed upon them, either by the government. And also the planning authority are not the technology companies like Siemens, IBM, and Cisco, what they did in South Korea and Abu Dhabi in United Arab Emirates. But the citizens okay, thank you. So citizens are not seen as testers of this technology, but they are seen as co-producers and also co-designers of this system. And so they are seen as a source of creativity and innovation. So the ICT-enabled system, it is a decentralized and smart infrastructural system for buyback and transfer of recyclable material that is being collected in the municipal solid waste streams. So here, the whole system is enabled by the use of ICTs, smartphones, and also blockchain technology. So waste reclaimers, the co-designers, partnership with the producers, and also the ICT companies develop this waste management app. I think I have to explain before I run through my presentation. So we are faced by a municipal solid waste management challenge. So in 2016, about 2.01 billion tons of general waste were produced. And this is projected to double by 2050. And in South Africa, 55 million of general waste was generated, and only 11% of that was diverted from the landfill. So I think researchers, Professor Godfrey and Onfenze, agree that 80 to 90% of this 11% of this waste that has been diverted, I mean, 80 to 90% of waste is diverted to the landfill, and then the remaining 11%, I mean, 80 to 90% is disposed into the landfill, and 11% is diverted. And also now seeing on this one graph and the table. So in Cape Town, 22 of 25 municipalities, their landfills have got less than 5 years lifespan. And also in the city of Joburg, I think by 2030, we have a landfill here. And then the city of Joburg operates 4 landfills. So like Mary Louise, it was predicted that its estimated closure was July 2021. When I was doing the research, it was meant to be July 2021. I don't know whether they've extended it. And then Robson Deep next year, August. So that estimated closure. So you can see the challenge that we are facing. So municipalities adopted the zero waste to go in separation of source, trying to extend the lifespan of the landfills and also divert large amounts of waste from the landfill. So waste in South Africa, waste reclaimers undertake collection of recyclable material. So the role of waste reclaimers in municipal waste management has been widely researched because they are the link between the service chain, which is the municipality, and also the value chain, which includes the buyback centers, the recyclers, and also the industries. So to the municipalities, they provide, or they subsidize municipalities by providing free labor for collection and transporting of waste, while to the value chain, they provide raw materials. So, but statistics on the number of waste reclaimers and their actual contribution is limited. And say, I think Godfrey said there are about 60 to 80,000 waste reclaimers. Dr. Samson says there are about 40,000. So the exact number of reclaimers up to now is unknown. And also the actual contribution of those reclaimers, not of it is the data is collected from the private sector, not from the waste reclaimers. So the smart city concept has been adopted as a solution, try to address the issue of integration of waste reclaimers and also diverting large amounts of waste from the landfill. So the provision of ICT services to exclude communities help alleviate social exclusion, that is to integrate waste reclaimers. So smart cities, I think they originate from the concept of future urban utopias, where people have imagined and tried to design future urban cities that are livable and harmonious with nature. So up now, there's no universal agreed definition of smart city. The concept of smart city is context specific. So, but I like the definition by Rama Prasad, who said smart city is a two-word construct of smart and the city. It definitely is a divine urban location, but the concept of smart is context specific. You know, smart can be intelligent, can be clean, you know, can be techno advanced. It depends on how you apply smart. That's why cities in South Africa, they've got different approaches to smart cities. Context are specific. So, but mostly because technology is key to smart city. So the most definition of smart cities has been technological, the deployment and integration of technologies into infrastructures. You know, like trying to manage resource efficient, smart water, you know, smart electric meters, and so ICT is key to cities becoming smart. However, the critique is on this top-down approach because of the planning authority, since IBMs, those people who produce these techniques and then sell it to the cities or municipalities or government. So now it becomes a business model instead of becoming an instrument for social inclusion and improving the quality of life. In India, where the smart city approach, automated bin system was deployed, it has disrupted the efficient existing formal or the Kabari system, which has been there for years. But when it was implemented in India, it disrupted. And also the architecture sometimes not applicable. And then the users have to pay annual fees, which are expensive. However, like in South Africa, these fees are being paid by the producers like Coca-Cola and Unilever so that waste reclaimers are able to access digital platforms. So, as I said, Bodoma Smart Cities imagines innovation emanating from the people who are using this technology. And it is co-created with citizens and the private sector. So these citizens, okay, like waste reclaimers, households, and industries were excluded, you know, in the top-down approach, smart waste management cities. I'm talking about separation of source. You realize that the producers were excluded, the households, because it was driven by the ministry to enforce separation of source. So here, citizens are also one of the important things that training and education is key to the process, so that citizens acquire skills necessary to work with these intelligent ICT management platforms. Then my research is a qualitative approach. I adopted a case study of the city of Johannesburg and also Cape Town. So in Cape Town, the two ICT systems that is regionalized, which is operating in Bridgetown, and then we have Kudakwashe, which is operating in Khayelitsha, while in the city of we have BankU that is operating in the city. So, so regionalize works directly with households. Okay, regionalize works directly with households. And also it hires experienced waste reclaimers, equip them with tricycles, so their aim just to generate data to show compliance with the data framework annual target. Okay, so one of the most interventions that have been done by Regionalize is to provide tricycles. So remember, waste reclaimers were seen as because we use trolleys, which of course congestion and access to cities. However, Regionalize intervened the provision of tricycles, and also we see restaurants being given hand scales they use when they're collecting. They're able to weigh to quantify, I think, the weight of the recycled material that has been collected at the household. And then we also have provision of smartphones. So these smartphones have got daily schedule list. So whereby waste no longer need to wake up early and travel a long distance, but they actually know where they're going to collect the recycled materials. By so doing, it optimize the route and reduce the decentralized waste reclaimers. The other thing is the intervention provision of local hubs or the storage container. So waste reclaimers no longer store their waste in designated spaces. For instance, we have a waste reclaimer village here, which is in that's Storage Park, which is in conflict with the city of Joburg. Okay, then the next thing is because of this technology, we're now having what's known as a systematic and organized way of collection. Because in the informal sector, collection is disorganized. But however, in the ICT system, it is organized. And also the use of ICT enables us to have easy access also to record the time for collection, the place, and the reclaimer who have collected the material. The other thing is we have also an organized value chain. So in the traditional system, there are main actors. There's an informal reclaimer, the middleman, the informal buyback center, a smaller informal buyback center. Then we have a buyback center, a commercial. It is disorganized, but the digital value chain incorporates also households, which excluded, and so the industries, so that they're able to track the performance, I think, of their waste. And the same thing that we now have permanent and accurate data, which can be done in real time. And also because of this data, we were able to compare the performance of reclaimers and against the city and other private companies. Here we have this one is for Arrow, which is waste reclaimers in the city of Joburg, where we can see that city of Joburg has never met its annual target for recyclable material, but waste reclaimers collect more than the city in terms of recyclable material. The other issue is the issue of because the system is developed on blockchain technology, it is able to produce a record of transaction. And those records of transaction makes the waste reclaimer bankable. And they also used to provide as proof of income, taxes, credits, and other stuff. And then, so the discussion, we have two approaches to integration. One is in-depth integration, where waste reclaimers are being hired, trained, and equipped with it. The other one, which is being used by BankU and Kudakwashe, is collaborative, where they just use the app to generate data for the producer. Okay. Okay, no, thank you.
I can't hear you anymore. Okay, awesome, fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. I think I get an extra 2 minutes then because of that. First of all, I'd like to say hi to everyone. Thank you to Vish and the rest of the team for hosting this event. Just to confirm what Vish was asking earlier. He didn't know where I was. I am in Zim, but I am in a small town called Gwanda in Matabeleland. So hopefully my network is not patchy, but so far it's been holding up. So I've been able to really get involved and hear all the great research that have been shared. So I'm going to be sharing with you my MA research. My research was done with Vish as my supervisor. So if there's anything you guys do not understand, you should just direct it to him and complain, and we can take it from there. Give me a second. There we go. I think I also need someone to confirm again that you can see this. I'm not sure. Fantastic. Great. So I'll just take it from the top. So my research was on trade union investment companies, promoting worker control and solidarity economy in South Africa. So the main issue about what I was trying to invest in intellectually here was trade unions, as we've always known them, were the political activists on the road who used to, in some cases, throw things, but in most cases, they were really pushing for labor rights on a day-to-day basis. And then there was this new phenomenon that happened in the 90s where most trade unions started running investment companies, which are essentially companies that control financial resources that are actually funded by in most cases, by trade union workers, with the idea of that once the trade union workers, for example, get fired or they retire, they can get a lump sum from these investment companies. And for me, this was a contradiction of some sort. Why on earth do workers have investment companies? And that was the journey that I went through. And the two issues I wanted to focus on was, okay, even though the idea of a trade union investment company is contradictory, let's see if on one end they can promote that emancipatory future of worker control or of one of solidarity economy. So that's essentially how I then tried to frame this and see was if or if not this was the case, and henceforth the question mark. So conceptually, there were two things I looked at. This was the labor process and hegemony, as well as the counter-hegemony and worker control. I'll start off with the labor process theory and hegemony. The labor process theory, for those who do not know, is essentially the question that brings about the issue of how is labor actually used within the process of the oppressive regime of capitalism? What are the processes that are put in place and how the system in itself essentially gets value from the work of the labor? The key theories of this are Karl Marx and Braverman and Burrowe. Karl Marx and Braverman, although they will focus a lot more on the structural aspects of it. So for the sake of time, I'll be very basic as much as possible. But when we mean the structural aspects of the labor process theory, we're referring really to the issue of standardizing work, the splitting of work, the alienation of labor, all those things that were the structural issues, and how essentially they were creating a process, and that in itself was how we could explain how labor is oppressed. And then Burrowe, in his works, he was focusing more on what I would call the psychological aspects of it, and how in all of these things, the capitalist takes control of labor. Why I focus and I really wanted to explain the labor process theory and hegemony was because I felt it was important to be able to express what a worker situation is like, and then the solutions that come out of it are then what we now call the counter-hegemony, or the works that are done and the processes to ensure that we are now fighting the labor process as we understand it, or in other words, how capitalism is designed in regards to labor. The counter-hegemony, the main theorist of this is Gramsci, and essentially what Gramsci was arguing for was that there was a strong need for a reimagination of where the source of power is. There was need, and so he says a lot of things, but there were aspects that he brings up about situations like we need the organic intellectuals, and those are essentially workers, in my case study, workers who could really reimagine how the workspace is done for the sake of workers. And then after that, I know I wrote 2 forms of worker control here, but there are actually 3 within my research that I actually found out, and there are different methods and manners that this could be done, which I will get into a bit further. And then, so conceptually, that's what I was focusing on, the counter-hegemony, the hegemony, and the labor process theory. But in terms of my literature review, because it's an investment company, one of the key aspects I focused on was this financialization. And as quoted here, financialization, as I took it, was the increasing importance of financial markets, financial motives, institutions, and elites in the operation of the economy and its governing institutions. So usually this is usually directed to national governments or companies or banks and the likes. But what I was now trying to show is, or think about, was were trade unions in themselves become financialized spaces where you not normally think of that. But the fact that investment companies, what did that actually mean in terms of our relation to labor and actually getting work done on the ground? The other aspect of the literature review that I focused on, which is very key, especially to this workshop and the issues around emancipatory futures, was the issue about solidarity economy. If you remember, what I outlined was that my solidarity economy focus was, my research focus was on trying to see if trade union investment companies actually brought some form of solidarity economy. And the solidarity economy is essentially an economy that focuses on certain values. That's reciprocity, intersubjectivity, complementarity, cooperation, economic equality, ecocentrism, popular ownership, and democracy. So that was essentially the benchmark where I was going to place the trade union investment companies against. So that said, I focused on two investment companies, Hoskin Consolidated Investment Limited, which is owned by SACTU, so that's the Southern Africa Clothing Textile Workers Union, and then the Mining Investment Trust, which is run by the National Union of Mine Workers. So you'll see that this is more or less the profile of most of the trade union investment companies that I could find within my research. And from the list here, you can see there were quite a number of them. So NUM, Nehao, COSATU in itself, as the parent union, has one, NUMSA, Pop Group, PAU, SACTU. There were so many investment companies, but they were really hidden. But I focused on SACTU and NUM for two reasons. SACTU, under the name Hoskin Consolidated Investment Companies, is a publicly registered company, while NUM, while the Mining Investment Trust is actually still private. So I felt that would be an interesting comparative analysis that I could take upon that and see if they actually act in any different ways, or in actual fact that they're very similar. So this is SACTU, and this is mainly the companies that they own. I'll just pinpoint a number. 15 minutes is not too long. So the really interesting ones were, for me, Togo-san Holdings, which is huge. And this was interesting for me because Monte Cassino, which is seen as the space of elite capitalism, is actually owned by HCI, which is owned by SACTU. So in actual fact, workers, clothing workers in South Africa own one of the most abrasive spaces of capitalism within South Africa, which I thought was quite interesting. They also own ETV, Golden Arrow Bus Services, for those who have been to Cape Town, run probably the most buses within the Cape Town system. And then the Mining Investment Company, the interesting companies that they were involved with were First Rand, which is part of FNB and Rand Merchant Bank. They own about 6.5%. Quite a number of hotels. Tracker is also part of them. But you'll see that the Mining Investment Company had about 20 companies involved in finance, gambling, gaming, technology, etc. And that will become very important fact just now. So one of the key results from my research, and what I focused on in putting across here, was how the trade union investment companies were in relation to worker control here. So I'll tell you from the bat that there was not a lot of worker control within the trade union investment companies, and this is why. First of all, as point A puts out, there was a labor aristocracy that came to board. That's essentially within that labor movement of the trade unions, the secretary generals and the presidents became workers beyond normal workers. So the examples that I give are of Jeremy Copeland, who is the CEO of HCI currently, Golden, and Abraham Patel. These were interesting characters who were heavily involved and controlled quite a huge chunk of the investment companies that I mentioned, but they're not really workers anymore. They'd actually taken up a new character, which is that of the CEO. And also the ones I didn't mention here, which would be of interesting fact, is that NUM actually produced 3 presidents in its short history. And you'll see that the presidents, example, our current South African president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, the investments that he has mirrored the investments of the MIC. MIC investment companies. So that in itself is also interesting. I also found out that there was an arm's length government system at hand. Arm's length in the sense of the trade union workers do not really know a lot about the investment companies. They had an idea that they had money, but they didn't know what they invested in or how it was invested. So, for example, there was not a lot of trade union investment company updates at the Congress. Workers were not really interested in the updates, which were given as SACTU. Neither was there any voting for the type of investments that the trade union investment company was doing. And this was heavily linked again with the labor aristocracy that I mentioned. And the last point I'd like to make here is the issue of the contradiction between workers being capitalists. This is important because, for example, in 2009, 2018, and 2020, Golden Arrow Bus Services did strikes, had held strikes, within Cape Town. And they were complaining that they were not getting enough money from their owners. Contradictory here is that the owners were actually another union, which is SACTU. And the transport workers were complaining that their owners are not getting the money. So for me, that was interesting that there was such a strong contradiction here. And the quote below is from one of the workers within Golden Arrow, where they said they want to maximize profit in order to give their directors more increases. Ironically, their directors are, in actual fact, SACTU workers. So I thought that was actually very interesting. I'll move on to the next set of results, which is the issues around the solidarity economy. So when I was focusing on the solidarity economy, what I really wanted to focus on was the issues of economic equality, the issues of environmental awareness, because again, solidarity economy it's got such a breadth of things you can look at, but those are the things I really want to focus on, and I'll mention those things. First of all, point A talks about investing for maximum returns. You will find that most of the investment companies focus on specific industries: media, real estate, finance, and energy, which I found was quite interesting. Why these areas? And you'll find that these are the areas where there was not a lot of labor involved, because most of the investment companies had this policy, which was called invest where you do not organize. So they will not invest within their own workers per se, but they'll invest in other industries, which then lead to the contradiction I mentioned earlier about Golden Arrow. And then there's also the issue and point D, which I'll highlight there, which was that climate change became a growing distraction. And why I called it a growing distraction is because it was a nuisance. It was not something that they felt they had to deal with or be part of the solution. They were essentially circumventing it, because the logic was not one of transformation or emancipation. It was still within the capitalist idea of what profit maximization is about. So for example, with SACTU, you would see in their reports how they focus on ESG factors. And ESG factors is essentially the 21st century term where they're trying to show their greenness. It's called, there's a term for it and I'm forgetting. Michelle will be very angry with me about this. But the term will come back just now. Essentially, they were not doing what they were supposed to do in terms of environmental protection, social protection, and governance protection. And it's important, I think, within this space for us to be able to differentiate between ESG and just transition. And there's a huge difference between those two things. The just transition is a lot more committed to actually changing the substance of how the economy runs, while ESG is really just smearing above the cracks. And then the last one which was interesting within my research, because I did this during COVID. COVID crisis was interesting on a number of levels. For example, Housing Consolidated Investments, because most of its income is from the tourism industry, they suffered hugely within the struggle. Within the COVID crisis. And this graph here that you'll see here is essentially pointing to show you what actually happened. And there I put COVID-19, and you can see that's the day when COVID-19 happened and the huge drop that occurred because of it. And what this essentially showed was how the COVID crisis really affected the company. But my question was, did this even affect the actual workers within SACTU? Did they get any support from an organization like this one that was essentially was suffering because of the COVID crisis? And you will see that the COVID crisis, its effect on HCI and its effect on SACTU was totally different. There was not a direct correlation between the two things, which for me was interesting again to see, is there actually a lot of worker control within HCI, and also is a union investment company even really linked to the workers that they say they represent. And unfortunately, what I should have done, which I thought was interesting, was to show you this graph, but now at our current period. And so the figure that's 4,400 is actually now about 15,000. HCI has had a huge recovery over the last 18 months. And why this is interesting for me is that at a time of serious inflation, at the time of the Ukraine war, the workers at Sub2 actually got any benefit from the huge influx of returns that HCI returned, and the answer from my preliminary readings that I did in the last week or so is that no, that's not the case. So I think I will stop there, concluding with the issue which is most at heart about this, which is again the contradictions of workers being capitalists. If there's anything my research showed is that the idea of workers trying to get involved within the capitalist process of production through investment companies was a survival strategy for trade unions in terms of trying to gain income, since other sources of income such as worker fees and worker pays were less. However, the solutions have not benefited the worker at the bottom. They have benefited that higher echelon of the labor aristocrats. And if anything, there's a strong need for the trade unions to really focus on trying to get more worker control within the investment companies, because these are spaces where they control a lot of income. And if they do get to such a space, I do believe they can then now redirect some of the investment to work on solidarity economies. So for example, investing out of bad oil, bad gas, and all that kind of stuff, and actually investing in things like renewable energy, etc., etc. Things that I would have shared a lot more, but my 15 minutes were up. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Kuda. Which one am I using? This one. Thanks, Kuda. Always fascinating. I mean, I know that HCI have had a huge oil and gas find off the Namibian border too. Right, we have a hand up. I can only see Devon's hand. Devon, please pose your question.
Thanks. It's directed at the last presentation, Kudakwashe, on the investment companies. So I think that's a very interesting project. It's a very necessary one about what the investment companies are doing. However, I wondered, what are you going to do with the comparison? Because when you are looking at two different companies, what is it, where are they similar and where are they different? The impression I'm getting from what you are saying is that, well, they're all the same, there's no workers' control, and there's nothing more, apart from the different companies you've listed, there's nothing more interesting to know about them. However, from my understanding, now I used to work with the NUM. Sorry, I'm Devon Play from the Sociology Department, for those who don't know me. And I do know the very different origins of the two unions, the NUM and SACTU. SACTU came from a tradition of workers' control, and Johnny Copeland, who was a general secretary of SACTU, was very much part of that group of people in the 1970s and 1980s promoting workers' control. Whereas the NUM came from a different tradition. Cyril Ramaphosa was in the Black consciousness tradition, and they had a much more top-down understanding of unionism, but then, they all came together in COSATU. Now, and then, of course, the individuals got together, Golding and Copeland, and became very close friends until they had a huge split over ETV. Now, what would be interesting is to find out directly from them, say, right, Mr. Copeland, you promoted workers' control. is that going to be your intention to actually interview them? What is it that you've done? Or how have you departed from your original principles of workers' control with these investment companies that you are now running? And also the other thing is, what are they doing exactly to benefit workers? The impression you are sort of giving is that they're doing nothing for workers, but they will claim that they are using these investment companies for bursaries and for a whole range of other benefits for workers. So you need to add that dimension to give a rounded picture of what is happening. So I'm assuming you're still beginning on this research journey, so that's an area that you are going to go into. Is that correct?
No, I actually did my MA last year, but I can answer your questions. I got capacity enough, so I will answer them.
Okay.
Should we wait for more questions?
I think we could answer them now, and then we'll move on to the other questions that have been raised in the chat room. Are there any questions within this room? Yeah, okay, so we'll go. Kuda, if you could answer Devon's question, please. We'll go to chat, and then we'll go into the room.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So thank you, Devon, for that. So on the issue of what they actually do for the workers, you rightly stated, they speak a lot about their bursaries, the scholarships that they offer, especially the children of the workers for their unions. That's on both ends. So why that for me is important is that is something that companies already do. It is not emancipatory in any way. So if I can put it in another language, I'm trying to remember the figures, but essentially, for argument's sake, HCI is worth $10 billion. The CSR project is probably worth about 5 million rands at its best in a year. So that's what it is. They're mirroring capitalist processes of production without actually arguing for a different manner of doing it. So that is their argument. But in terms of what they can actually do, the resources that they have, they could do a lot more. And then secondly, in terms of how different they are, and thank you for that, I actually do show how the worker control aspect is a lot stronger in SACTU compared to NUM. And what you'll see is that in terms of if they were willing to say anything, I can assure you SACTU and NUM refused to respond to my request for interviews. I'll just say it was because of COVID-19, and I'll keep it there. But for example, Copeland did write a book. And in his book, that's what I really try to search out for. And he does not really, in his works, he doesn't really respond directly to the issue, besides saying that the only way they could really attract investment was with this top-down structure. He said it was the safest option. And his argument is that once you put it into the trade unions, it becomes political and it will become disorganized. His argument being SACTU is the most successful trade union investment company. Reason being, a lot of trade union investment companies have fallen to corruption or they've actually just closed. So he's saying the only way they could protect the investment company is to separate essentially the trade union from the investment company. But again, that is the argument, right? When we're speaking about the solidarity economy, why do we doubt the ability and the opportunity of getting workers involved in this? And I argue, for example, is that if workers were supported by civil society and academia to of course give some form of separation of powers to the investment companies to work on what they need to work with, but still giving the right to vote on what they think is important. Those two things are not separate in any way. And I give the example of how cooperatives have functioned very well in Emilia Romagna, that's in Italy, because there was a focus and a deliberate action to really try and invest in those spaces. So I'll stop there, but in short, that's what I can do. What I will do, Devon, is to share my not my short paper, but the actual research. I think it'd be great for you, and it'd be good to hear from you. Thank you.
Ruth, we see your hand. I'll come back to it in a minute. I just want to get into the chat questions. Thank you. Oh, can't see the chat. Why can't I see the chat? There we go. So we've got some questions from Elias. Jani, issues of just transition are one of the key challenges facing reclaimers and the zero waste framework, and how it relates to livelihoods have yet to be resolved. It doesn't seem to be a question.
I think I just said some thoughts.
Okay. For Vincent, technology companies don't sell social inclusion and its top-down approach. It would have been interesting for Vincent to explore how power relations are embedded in the tech and mediated at the point of implementation. Who owns the data generated? Who is it shared with? What happens to the aggregate knowledge generated by informal sector? It would have been interesting to look at how reclaimers are challenging these technologies and also exploring alternate uses of them. Banku is a classic case of how blockchain tech embed inequalities, and we, Arrow, would have loved to have been part of the study and others. Number 4 point, general point to scholars. We, Arrow, welcome collaboration, co-creation, and are always keen to know about research and critiques that potentially enhance and sharpen our work. Therefore, we call on all of you to approach us. Right. Would either of you like to respond to that? Vincent, do you want to respond to those questions? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna show you the question. Yeah. Do you want to think on that and I'll ask Ruth, or do you want to answer that straight away?
No, thanks, Mr. Ed. And I'm grateful Eli was one of my respondents. I engaged with him on this arrow issue. Unfortunately, we didn't finish our discussion, but I'm willing to continue with the discussion. Now, on the issue of who owns data, because when I interviewed BankU, BankU, the company that develops software, they said the data is owned by West reclaimers. However, the people, this data is controlled by the producer, which is Coca-Cola and Unilever, because they need to report to the department as a requirement for their PPR regulation. So when we discussed, the problem was some of the West reclaimers that I interviewed, they can, I think, own data which is on the profile, but the problem is how is it presented or generated by the producer when they report to the company? Because with data, because data is profitable, the West reclaimer, since they co-create data, they also need to sell this data to the municipality and even to other private companies like I think let me say like Pick and Pay or whichever, because the data shows the consumption and that the geographical location. So with that data, these shops are able to provide, I think, to have a market where they can provide their product. Unfortunately, this data is being controlled by the producers. So all in all, this technology works for the producers. So West reclaimers are just, I think, the partner to create data. And then even like the regionalized project in Cape Town, everything is owned by the private company. Even though they hire reclaimers, give them smartphones, tricycles, but at the end of it, it is controlled by the ICT-enabled. So now, how is it shared? On my slide, was the issue of organized value chain. So at the bottom tier, you have the house or the West reclaim, then you have a 5%, and you have the producers. So once the 5% input the data. Everyone on the system is able to see the data which has been impacted by the pandemic or by the, in terms of region. When region has supposed to collect, when the West Tema was to collect material at the city household, is able to input the data, take a picture of the waste that has been collected. So at the end of the week, the household will receive a text message or SMS on the quantities of waste that they've traded, also the carbon emission they've saved.
Sorry, there's a lot of echo. We can't hear anything.
Thanks, Vincent. Ruth, would you like to ask your question, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Right, go ahead, Ruth.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Hello? Am I audible?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. I think my questions and comments, they are related to the investment company. I think I would agree with the speaker that says that I think you have just scratched the surface in relation to digging deep, especially when it comes to the worker control on the investment company. I think the important aspect that I feel that at least it should have been covered is the fact that when it comes to how the investment companies are impeding on democracy internally, because the worker control, I think it goes in both ways. We've seen that in almost all of them, investment companies, especially here in South Africa, that the role of investment companies in terms of dictating who should emerge as the leader. I think that's one aspect that I'm of the view that if it could have been covered, a lot could have been surfaced pertaining that. That's the first aspect. And then when it comes to solidarity, I think you also spoke about that. And you went to an extent of revealing the role that, the absence role that the investment company should have played during the COVID-19 in terms of what they would have promised workers that this is what they stood for. I think on that, I fully agree with you, but at the same time, I feel that also the issue of corruption, because of corruption, it's very much rife in the investment company. It's something that could also have been surfaced pertaining that. And I think we once spoke, me and you, if I'm not mistaken, where you wanted some views about our investment company. I would appreciate Comrade Vish, that Prof Vish, that if you can, maybe can just exchange. I would like to invite you in some of the sessions where we are discussing the issue of investment company, and I must attest that I am the victim of an investment company from my union. So hence I'm saying that a lot could have been touched on. Most probably there should have been, you can also go to an extent of having another paper pertaining that. But I sincerely appreciate your work you've done on the investment company, and such information, it has to be shared and be known by workers out there, because of this is these are workers' company, or supposed to be workers' company. At the same time, workers knows nothing about it. Yeah, I think I will end it there. Thank you so much.
Ruth, thank you for joining us and making those statements. Kuda, would you like to respond at this point?
Yeah, sure. No problem.
You're muted.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ruth, for that. And yes, we did speak and you did give me great insights. I'd like to say again, this is the terrible thing about 15 minutes. We need to ask Vish for 30 minutes next time. But there's a cool quote I got. Like, I can't remember which comrade it was, but he said, "There's a very strong scratch in my back and I'll scratch yours," which speaks directly to the issue you're mentioning, that trade union leaders and the investment company support each other with their self-interest. So investment companies have found ways of being corrupt enough to invest or use investment company money to ensure that their preferred candidate wins in trade union elections. So that point is very much definitely there. And regarding the paper, I don't want to promise, but I'll push to see if something can be done. Because again, I think there's so many variables that are with this. So being able to really focus on different aspects of the paper and breaking it down will be great, not only for the struggle within the unions, but also, as for me, I'm Zimbabwean. So this for me was also very interesting country analysis to see how can my trade unions within Zimbabwe not copy or copy from South Africa. So definitely, thanks so much, Ruth. I will again share my final research report.
Thank you all. We're now going to Hanli's question.
Thanks. Two questions. One for Vincent, one for Jani. This week on the radio, I heard that there's going to be a cashless expectation for recyclers, that they cannot accept any recycled goods and pay cash. I don't know if you picked up on that. And, oh, okay. If you haven't, it's okay. But what do you think of it? If you could just give me your thoughts on such an intervention to try and prevent crime, I suppose. But that's what I think it was about. And then when I Googled it now, it seems to have come through a petitioned process. So so that there's a paper trail at recyclers to trace if cable theft happens and how it happens, then it sort of puts a bit of a spanner in the works in the recycling system, especially of copper wire, obviously. That's the one question. And then, Jani, just on your research question, I was wondering about the vulnerability of the waste pickers. Because your two case studies weighs on the municipalities sort of benefit in how they can optimize their system. But if you reverse the question to, because if I heard it correctly, you were saying, what can waste pickers offer municipalities? But I was wondering, what can municipalities offer waste pickers? If you turn it around, the vulnerability of the waste pickers' long-term sort of employment could be, I don't know, it was just something I picked up. Thanks.
I think let's run with questions now and you can answer them en masse.
Thank you. Hello. Once again, I think my question goes to, well, let me see if I read it correctly here. Kudakwashe, Manjonjo. Maybe didn't have the time to touch on that, well, because the time was not enough. It was so many interesting things to share. I want to understand how are the general workers, what is the sentiment, their sentiment about the way these investment companies are being managed by the leadership? Is there any sort of resistance? Because for now it seems like they're just passively looking at the development of, their own unions and their own. Is there some sort of agency? And I would like to get that sentiment as well. And for the other colleague, I think it's Vincent. Vincent. My question is more like on the theoretical point of view. I would like to understand. Maybe you did mention that, but I probably didn't understand it or didn't hear it. How? I mean, which theoretical framework do you actually use for your study? Is there any sort of which theory informs the study, and how are you approaching it? I did not hear that. You were sharing some very interesting data, but I would like to see also on the theoretical side of the study, just to hear a little bit. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just going to throw questions at the entire panel. Kuda, I mean, I understood the research constraints you faced. And I think for the audience and the group, it's important for people to be sensitized to the fact that these investment companies are not very, very transparent. I mean, some of the sort of good practice stuff that happens with HCI and so on, putting out their financials and so on, that's good. But you really can't figure out some of these issues easily, the relationships, etc. And it's unfortunate that Kuda was also hit by COVID, because he couldn't really reach into unions and really unearth more insight. But Kuda, this is a very hot issue of union investment companies. It's a crucial issue. And, you know, Ruth comes from NUMSA, and, you know, she was the deputy president of NUMSA, so a very high-ranking official. But even in that union, the investment company wasn't accountable and has played a very, very destructive role, as you have might have picked up. It completely corrupted the recent Congress of NUMSA and literally has reduced the union to a battleground. My question to Kuda is, you know, this was your master's and, you know, 75,000 words. But I do think that there's potential for you to develop this. So maybe my question is, you know, don't drop this. You know, we should continue a conversation about what you do next. Even if it's a series of articles or if it's maybe a PhD, I don't know, but this is a crucial thing. So that's the one question. To Jani, you know, so the issue of redesign is very important. Redesign of products could be shallow and it could be circular economy. So instead of a product getting obsolete in 2 years, it could get obsolete in 4 years. But serious redesign could basically attempt to keep products alive for a very long time. They could rethink what goes into those products, or recycled materials go into those products. And you know, they literally close the zero waste loop, if you like. So I'm asking, you know, what are some of the sort of deeper ideas around redesign, either in the circular economy space or in the zero waste space? If you can unpack that a little bit more, because and even from your reading and what you are finding. And then for Vincent, I really think I think you mentioned in Bridgetown or somewhere that the waste recyclers know where to go and pick up the waste. So I'm just keen to know, do households upload that information onto the app, or how does that interface work? But at the same time, you know, when I went to Brazil, actually to meet waste pickers as well, catadores, what was very interesting in their politics with households, they built active solidarities. I mean, I think one of you mentioned it. You know, I think it was Jani. But in Brazil, the middle class communities and the working class communities knew that these waste pickers now were part of how they lived, and so they were very conscious of supporting them, etc. Does this technology sort of build solidarity with households, or does it have some kind of desensitizing, distancing effect? Thanks.
No, thank you. If I had presented, I think, my slides up to the end, the final, the last slides has that issue of cashless payments. So this is one of the advantages that is brought in by the ICT technology. Because usually in the traditional systems is cash-based. So sometimes it makes the buyback center, it increases crime because some of the people would rob those buyback centers. So now, because of the ICT system, we now have different modes of payment, where waste reclaimers are now being paid using a mobile platform. It can be cash send, e-wallet, and all that. So now it has also boosted trading because we no longer it's no longer based on cash, but on various modes of payment. And also in so doing, it is incorporated the waste reclaimers into the banking system, which was absent in the previous informal system. So this issue of cashless payment, I think, has been there. And then now, okay, going back to the second thing, the issue of Bridgetown in Cape Town. So Regionize is a mobile app where households download. Then you create a profile. So now you request for a pickup. Understand? So now different people would request for pickup, and then the system now arrange them. So that's why waste reclaimers receive a daily schedule list, so they know where to pick, because already the household has requested for their separate recycles to be collected. So when the reclaimer arrive at the house, so what happens? They've got hand scale, so they're able to weigh the quantities and then upload on the household profile. So once they finish, immediately they also have to verify, whether the information is correct. So instantly they will receive the text message, how much waste, they have recovered, and also later on they will then at the end of the month, now they're going to receive what is Rimal. Rimal is a virtual currency which acts as an incentive to households for participating in recycling. So this Rimal is redeemable, in terms of airtime, data, and even they can also buy groceries. Yes. So by so doing, so this is motivated, I think, the issue of incentives. That's one thing that has been brought in by the ICT-enabled system. However, like these different apps, I think they've got different systems of incentives. Yes. And then now going to, I think the last question was the theoretical framework. So I use the social transition theory to sustainability, which frames social transition as a consequence of configuration, between citizens, technology, and policy. So now, obviously, the technical theory to sustainability, I think, about an analytic truth, which is the multi-level perspective. So it shows how, when technology is introduced, now how it transitions before it becomes active. So obviously, it has 4 stages. So currently now, most of these projects are in the pilot phases, where they're trying, because like the Bank U started in 2019 before COVID as a top-up project. So then the other one in Cape Town started in 2018.
Okay. So let me answer Hannelee's question about the vulnerability of waste pickers, and how municipalities can actually offer them something. So I do think that, yeah, obviously that's an excellent question. And actually through his work as well, we see that power dynamics are real. And I think it can be so easy for municipalities or whoever to bring in waste pickers and say, yes, we want to learn from you, tell us everything you know, and then saying, okay, thank you, we're going to do something on our own now, and not actually integrating them into all aspects of a project or a system, and allowing them to also benefit from it. So, well, let me say maybe some of the needs I think they have, definitely they need more material recovery facilities so that they don't have to travel so far to drop off their stuff. At those facilities, clean water, sanitation, those type of things they need. I know here in Johannesburg, I think especially with Arrow, they've really advocated for access to the parks and the green spaces in the neighborhood so they can use that to store their materials, because they don't drop it off every day at the buyback centers. They want to collect a bit more. So opening up spaces where they can sort and store their stuff overnight that is safe. So that's some of their needs where I think a municipality can definitely help them. But then, yeah, also on another level, they need to be integrated more and also benefit financially, and not just, okay, here's a little bit more, but they should really actually become the owners of the systems and empowered to take that lead. But I think for that, it's key that they are sort of organized and that they have a bigger voice. On Vish's question of redesign of products, either in the circular economy or zero waste. Also, the examples I'm going to give are obviously from producers, but it's interesting ones, I think. The bigger idea is that we have a service economy instead of like an ownership, individualistic economy in a way. So where you actually pay for a service instead of buying something, and where all of us have the same thing. So for instance, like obviously a few decades ago, but it's actually coming back now, is the thing of milk delivery to your house, where milk is delivered and actually it's a service you're paying for. And then they come and pick up the glass bottles, glass containers, they fill it again, whatever. And in that way, then there's no waste, post-consumer waste, a milk bottle that the consumer needs to now recycle or make sure it ends up in the right place. So that, something like that. Philips also has the idea of light as a service. So for instance, that you wouldn't buy a light bulb at the hardware store, but that they come install all your lighting in your house. And then when a light bulb goes off or whatever, you call them and they come collect it, they fix it. And then obviously at their whatever facilities, they would have the right technology, whatever, to actually process that thing or recycle it in an effective way, again, so that it doesn't end up in the environment, or that, which again comes back to sort of producer responsibility. And then one other example, I think Lego is doing this, where with kids' toys, or well, with Lego then, where you also won't buy toys for your kids, but you sort of rent it for a number of years and per age group, and then after that you take it back, and then like, so if you think about examples like that, you can sort of imagine a paradigm shift of how we're going to relate to stuff in our everyday life, that we won't own things necessarily, but it would really be more of a culture of repairing things and sharing. So, yeah.
Okay, I think I've left out the issue of households building solidarity with waste reclaimers, because waste reclaimers now, they are operate in a specific area. So as they constantly collect recyclables at a specific house, there are now established relations between the household and the waste reclaimer. So by so doing, these households now purchase, I think, as Jani has already said, they now begin to purchase goods that are recyclable, so that they create employment for ensure that waste reclaimers, I think, they earn income And then the other issue is because of this type of relationship, West reclaimers end up doing, providing other services like delivering, like daily foods, across it, like in Bridgetown, they say, when it's coming, sometimes they'll be sent to buy vegetables and other stuff, and they're paid by the households. So, and some end up doing cleaning the yards, repainting, and other manual jobs. And by so doing, they have earned status and respect in the community. So, but as you all hear, I think we also need to support West reclaimers and purchase, I think, products, that are made up of recycled material, including even my T-shirt here. As you can see, is made of. So we need to support West reclaimers.
Anyone else got some questions? I just noticed years ago on a visit to New Zealand, the white goods. So white goods then were already being recycled. So you had a whole middle sector where white goods were collected and then parts replaced, and you could actually just keep your white goods going, white goods being fridges and all that stuff. You could keep that stuff going for years longer. And I think that's something that's really missing in South Africa. Maybe in the informal sector, there's a little bit of that, but I mean, that could be a whole nother sector as well. Are we ready for? Okay, Kuda, I've been persuaded to, I think Vish is about to offer you another scholarship. I'm just going to put it in there. No. Well, we can try.
Okay, thank you.
Kuda, well done. I'm really impressed. It's so good to see you having moved to completion on this. And as I say, I mean, for me, it's research that I will definitely reference. So please send me a copy. Okay. So should we wrap up for lunch for now? And we'll see everyone at 2 o'clock, and we look forward to further discussion.